They sat me at the head of my own dining table like a child in timeout and called it a family council. My son, Daniel, slid a little speaker between the salt shaker and the jar of my apricot jam, pressed play, and there it was, my voice, clear as a bell, saying I wanted to give them the house before my mind gets worse. The room held its breath. My daughter-in-law, Kira, stared at me with the kind of patient smile people use when they're sure you'll embarrass yourself. My hands were still flour-dusted from the scones I'd baked. I felt those same hands go cold. I'm 70, a retired librarian who still reshelves paperbacks at the community center twice a week because it calms me. I live in the cedar-sided townhouse Herald, and I paid off 20 years ago, the one with the geranium boxes and the slanted light at 4 in the afternoon. My life is ordinary and careful. I know where I left things. I make lists. I label the freezer containers with masking tape. Yet on the recording, my voice trembled and gave gifts I never give, my home, my checking account access, a promise to step aside. Daniel paused it and reached into his leather folder like a man retrieving logic. Mom, you've said concerning things lately, he began softly. We all agreed it's time to formalize what you already wanted. The durable power of attorney, the deed gift, the bank forms, only so we can help. There were printed documents. Tabs in neon colors. Kira placed a pen near my elbow like a spoon for medicine. I looked past them, past the framed photo of Harold fishing off Depot Bay, to the corner of the room where the wall clock my father repaired ticks with a stubborn rhythm. On the recording, my voice supposedly said these words at 8:10 p.m., right after dinner, and then, unmistakably, the clock chimed 6 times. Our clock only chimes on the hour, and 6 o'clock is when I feed the cat. I know because she yowls for it. On the table, the speaker's blue ring pulsed. I felt something old and stubborn rise up in me, the part of me that used to face down high schoolers sneaking pizza into the library stacks. Let's hear it again, I said. Kira flinched. Daniel didn't. He pressed play. When the word worse reached the room, I heard a faint microwave ding tucked behind the sentence, as if a tiny bell had been buried in my voice. Our microwave's been broken since June. I keep tea warm on the stove. I didn't argue. I didn't sign. I reached to refill my teacup and knocked the pen instead. It rolled off the table, disappearing under the hutch. My grandson, Ethan, slipped to retrieve it, and as he bent, he whispered without moving his lips, "Grandma, I saw Uncle bring a USB." He hid it in the blue sugar jar. My heart stuttered. When I looked up, Ethan gave the smallest shake of his head and put the pen where it had been. "We can do this tomorrow," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I'm tired." Daniel gathered his tabs like a dealer reshuffling the deck. Kira smiled like a caretaker stepping out of a room certain the patient will later comply. I walked them to the door with a tin of scones I didn't offer. On the porch, Mrs. Park from 2 doors down paused during her evening walk and held my gaze longer than usual, as if she'd heard something through our thin cedar wall and couldn't decide whether to say it out loud. I raised my hand in a little wave, more to keep it from shaking than to greet her. After they left, I opened the blue sugar jar and found the lid worm from a palm. There was no USB inside. But I did find one of Ethan's notes, folded so small it looked like a pellet. In his spiky 13-year-old letters, he'd written, "Don't sign anything tomorrow. I think they messed with your voice. I know someone who can help." I turned off the kitchen light and stood in the dark, listening to my clock count seconds back into place. The note trembled in my hand, and I let it. When my hand finally went still, I slid the note behind the photograph of Harold and me in our camping chairs by the lake, my most stubborn hiding place. Then I sat down with pen and paper and wrote a list of the things I had just learned. The last item read, "Find out how to prove a sound can lie." The next afternoon, an envelope from my bank arrived with a notice about upcoming account modifications. On Thursday mornings, the line at Covey Street Market curls past the rotisserie chickens and into the detergent aisle. I could feel the whispers before I heard them. Kira shops here, too, and she tells stories with wide hands. People began talking slower around me. Mrs. Park reached across the bananas and touched my sleeve, just a gentle press, The way you stop a book from slipping off a table and then let go without saying a word. Shame is heavy and private and stinks like metal on your tongue. I kept my eyes on the green onions and thought about the letter. Upcoming account modifications meant Daniel had visited the credit union with a copy of the audio and a packet of pre-filled forms. There was a line about new authorized users. There was a line about text alerts being rerouted to a caregiver number. My number had a black strike through it in the photocopy they enclosed, like a misbehaving student's name on a chalkboard list. I went to the branch. The credit union sits on the corner by the bus stop, a glass box full of potted ficus and hushed tapping. The assistant manager, a careful woman whose name tag read Priya, checked my ID twice and walked me to a desk. I'd seen her before. She always prints my statements on heavier paper when I ask. I didn't authorize any modifications, I said, and realized I'd clutched my scarf so tightly that my knuckles hurt. Priya tapped her keyboard. I tried to breathe like the yoga flyer suggests. She frowned. Someone attempted to add an authorized number yesterday, she said slowly, and paused on a screen I couldn't see. They brought a thumb drive with an audio file, which we don't accept as authorization. They claimed you asked for this because of, confusion. We declined. But they scheduled a review if they return with notarized forms. Notarized forms. Durable powers. Deeds. The words tumbled together until they became a thick rope around my chest. I pressed my palm flat to the desk. Could you print me something that shows this attempt happened? The date, the time. If you can. I'm not asking you to break rules, I added, and tried to smile like librarians do when we know a teenager really wants a book we're not supposed to lend. Priya looked at me longer than policy required. Then she hit print. This is just a basic log. But it shows a visitor, the attempted changes, and the refused status. The system timestamps. If there's an investigation, someone else can provide more. When she slid me the paper, I saw a detail I didn't expect. Under notes, someone had typed client's son brought a helper from Soundcraft Studio to improve audio clarity. I hadn't told her anything about audio. I hadn't used the word. Priya kept her face blank, but she tapped the paper once with her finger before withdrawing her hand, like a teacher tapping a paragraph a student should memorize. I walked out into air that smelled like cold rain. At home, the HOA had slid a notice under my door about a deed transfer inquiry. Please notify the association of any pending ownership changes to ensure compliance with parking bylaws, it said, as if the only problem would be whose car gets which space. Kira had forwarded a message to the HOA from her real estate attorney. We're exploring a transfer of title as a gift to the family, copying Daniel, not me. That evening, the family chat pinged with Daniel's message, Mom, we love you, but this is getting urgent. If you won't come to the notary with us, we'll schedule an evaluation so a neutral party can help. It'll be fine. I stared at the little typing dots until they went away. Evaluation. The word tasted like rubber gloves. I put down the phone and set the kettle on the stove out of habit. It rattled the way it always rattles, and I felt oddly grateful for a sound that couldn't be edited. When the kettle sang, I heard footsteps on the porch. I opened the door to find Ethan standing there with his hood up, lanky and breathless, holding a paper bag from the community center's teen film club. Lexi can help, he said before I could speak. She's the audio person at the center. She makes podcasts for school and knows how to check waveforms and stuff. She said if you have the original file, it's better, but she can even work from a recording if that's all we have. She told me her older brother studies digital forensics and taught her about splices. And Uncle paid someone. Lexi saw a Venmo to a Soundcraft person on Kira's buried feed once. She's good at looking. Please, don't be mad. I wasn't mad. I was embarrassed that my child had to rescue me and relieved, and something else too. I recognized the feeling from the first time I learned the Dewey Decimal System and realized the world could be organized, even the messy parts. Tell Lexi I'll bring her cookies, I said. And ask if she knows a lawyer who won't laugh at a 70-year-old asking about spectral graphs. Ethan grinned in that quick, hopeful way that makes boys look like their baby selves for a blink. As he ran down the steps, I saw Mrs. Park across the street, standing under her porch light with her tiny dog tucked in her cardigan. She watched Ethan go, then raised her eyebrows at me with a question I couldn't yet answer. The next morning, an envelope from a notary service appeared in my mailbox with appointment times I had not requested and a post-it. Kira booked this to ease stress. Simple signatures. No big deal. That night was the first time since Harold died that I talked to him out loud. Not in a grand way, not begging the universe. I just spoke to his picture while I polished the clock he loved. They think a sound can tell the truth better than I can, I said, and the fact that I said it made heat flare in my cheeks. I heard my chest creak like a cedar board in the sun and something clicked. Enough. I called a number Lexi texted me with an emoji-laden preface. He's serious, but nice. The voice that answered belonged to a man who introduced himself as attorney Luis Ortega. I told him I didn't know if I needed him. He said people don't call lawyers for fun. I described the family council, the audio, the bank log, the notary post-it, the HA notice about a deed inquiry. I tried not to cry. He didn't rush me. You've got two issues, he said finally. Capacity is a red herring if you're competent, and I suspect you are. The other issue is authentication. If they're trying to use audio to show intent, we examine provenance. I'll need to see the file, not a phone recording of a speaker. Chain of custody. Metadata. We also look for motive, payments, correspondences, timing. The court likes clean lines. Do you have an ally inside the bank? Priya's face rose in my mind like a page number. I might, I said. And I have a teenager with podcasts. Teenagers with podcasts have taken down worse, he said, so dry I almost laughed. The next day, Lexi came to my kitchen with a laptop stickered with moons and microphones. She laid out her tools with the reverence of a baker lining up measuring cups. When I admitted I didn't have the original file, she shrugged and said, "We'll start with what we have." She recorded the speaker playback on her device and began muttering noise floor, spectral view, crossfades. Her hair fell into her eyes, and she pushed it back with the back of her hand without looking away from the screen. "Listen to this consonant," she said finally, isolating my alleged gets. The wave shape here is suspiciously clean compared to the room noise. And here's a hard cut right before our house. See how the background has changes? Someone stuck snippets together. Amateur job, but not radio amateur. Paid amateur. I gave her cookies and watched her draw a little diagram on a napkin with arrows for the cuts. Harold would have adored her. Luis texted, "Get me a report with screenshots of the spectral anomalies," and I blinked at the phrase spectral anomalies, which sounded like ghost hunting until I realized we were hunting something real, a seam. Then came the blow. I went in my file drawer for the healthcare proxy Harold, and I had signed years ago, the one naming my friend Carla as my agent if I ever couldn't make decisions, and found the folder empty. I stared at the brown manila like it had sprouted holes. I keep things, it's what I do. My hands did what they do when I shelve, check, recheck. Nothing. For the first time in years, I swore out loud in my kitchen. I called Carla. We signed those in my living room. You remember? The day we spilled tea on Harold's sock? Of course, she said. You left with your copy. I kept the originals for the binder. Don't panic. 10 minutes later, she texted a photo of the proxy, intact in her binder, with the notary stamp Harold had joked looked like a sheriff's badge. In my panic, I had forgotten what librarians teach. A copy lives somewhere else. I exhaled so hard I had to sit. That evening, I accepted Kira's invitation to stay with us a few nights so we can keep an eye on you, and deliberately played up my fatigue. I left my cat with Mrs. Park and brought an overnight bag full of absolutely nothing I needed. It felt like betrayal to step into their guest room, but I needed their Wi-Fi network. I needed to become, as Luis put it, a quiet burden in the right place. Kira hovered like a brand new nurse. Daniel pretended not to watch me. Late that night, when the house was thick with sleep, I sat on the edge of the bed and checked my phone. My devices automatically tried to join their network. The name, SoundcraftTXT, blinked up at me. Not Ben at Home, or Kira's iPhone, but the name of a range extender branded like the studio. An extender. Why would they need that? To transfer large files? I screenshotted the network list and sent it to Lexi with one word, bingo. In the morning, Kira suggested we drop by the notary, just to get one little form out of the way. I smiled and said, "Of course, dear, and I'll need the bathroom first." In their downstairs powder room I found, beside the soap, a box of glossy business cards from Soundcraft Studio, audio restoration for families, and on the back, in blue pen, a number labeled R. Someone had written R in Kira's careful hand. I took a photo. I replaced the box exactly. When I opened the door, Ethan was in the hallway, staring at the carpet, jaw tight. He lifted his eyes to mine, and then toward the kitchen counter where the blue sugar jar sat, just like mine at home. I returned to my house that afternoon with two things I hadn't brought, their Wi-Fi name and a photograph of a business card. On my doorstep, Priya stood holding an envelope and a nervous smile. "I can't give you anything confidential," she said without preamble, "but I can meet you on your porch on my way home. I thought you should know a personal check from Daniel to our Harlow Consulting was deposited 2 days before your family council." The memo line said audio. I only know because the teller next to me asked how to code consulting for a non-business account. This is all I can do. In the envelope was nothing. She'd brought me nothing but the knowledge. It was enough. Later that evening, Luis called. "We'll petition for a temporary restraining order against any property transfer and file a motion in limine to exclude the audio. But we'll need expert analysis. Can Lexi's brother testify?" Lexi texted a new name with a flourish. "He's interning with a forensic lab. His supervisor owes him a favor." I put the kettle on and tried to keep my palms from sweating. When the kettle sang, I let it sing. Across the street, Mrs. Park's porch light blinked on. She watched me retrieve the evening paper like a sentry who had decided where her loyalty lies. The next morning, Daniel called to say they'd submitted the audio to the court as evidence of my intent to gift the house. The courthouse smelled like floor polish and worry. We gathered in a small hearing room with ugly fluorescent lights and a portrait of a judge from the 70s whose sideburns made him look vaguely disapproving even in oil paint. Daniel arrived in a suit that didn't quite fit and the eyes of a boy afraid of a test he didn't study for. Kira wore a soft gray sweater and an air of benevolence. She squeezed my forearm before we sat so hard I almost yelped and said, "We're doing what's best for you, Nora. You'll thank us later." Luis had the calm of a man who alphabetizes his spices. He greeted Daniel and Kira like they were library patrons with overdue books, nothing more. Beside him, Lexi's brother's supervisor, a real forensic audio examiner with calm hands and a voice made for explaining things to juries, sat with a slim folder. Priya waited in the hall on a bench, fingers pressed into the edge of her skirt, allowed in as a potential witness only if needed. Mrs. Park had come too, wearing her church hat. She told the bailiff she had community observations. No one knew what to do with that, so they gave her a seat behind me. Daniel's attorney, a brisk man with kind eyes that didn't land on mine, queued up the audio for the judge. My voice filled the room, saying words it had never said. The judge listened, expression neutral. "We move to admit this as evidence of intent," Daniel's counsel said. "Objection," said Luis. "Foundation, authentication, and reliability. We request voir dire of the proponent and a preliminary examination of the file's integrity." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Let's hear about the file." What happened next did not feel like triumph. It felt like breath after a long dive. The examiner projected a visual of the waveform and flipped to spectral view, where the colors looked like an X-ray of a hummingbird. He pointed to places where the background frequency changed abruptly, like a curtain opening on a different room. "Your Honor, natural speech recorded in a single environment produces consistent background noise. Here, the hiss shifts at 15 seconds, 27 seconds, and again at 42, consistent with copy and paste edits. There are digital splices without appropriate crossfades. Additionally, the file's metadata indicates an export from a software suite 2 days after the stated recording date, on a computer registered to Soundcraft Studio. We obtained this from the file's header, which the proponent provided to the bank and HOA. If the proponent claims this is a live, unedited recording, that cannot be true." He played the room tone from my kitchen, which we had recorded with a simple phone, the clock ticking like a metronome. Then he played the council audio and isolated the 6 chimes at 8:10 p.m. He explained that my clock chimes only on the hour, not at 10 past. He pointed out the microwave ding and held up a sworn statement from my appliance repair ticket showing I'd requested service months ago for a dead microwave. It was not theater. It was just facts. Luis called Priya. She kept her eyes on the judge, not on me, and described the refused attempt to modify my accounts, the note in the log about a helper from Soundcraft Studio, and the check she saw coded as consulting to our Harlow. The judge asked 3 careful follow-ups. Priya answered crisp as a new page. We also submit the HOA inquiry email initiated by Ms. Kira Bennett referencing a gift transfer prior to any alleged expression of intent by my client, said Luis, sliding a printed email across. And photographs from the Bennett's home showing a branded Soundcraft range extender and business cards. And finally, a notarized copy of Ms. Bennett's existing healthcare proxy naming a third party, inconsistent with the narrative that she sought to place immediate decision-making in her son's hands. Daniel's attorney tried to recover, suggesting I'd been confused, that I often forgot appointments, that these were well-meaning efforts. Luis nodded politely and asked the examiner to display the invoice from Soundcraft, because of course there was an invoice, discovered through a subpoena to their payment app, which showed a family package, cleanup, splicing, and noise reduction billed to R. Harlow. R stood for Richard, Soundcraft's owner, who Kira had described online as a godsend who helps families capture oral histories. The fake benefactor who helps families turned out to be the man Daniel had paid 2 days before the supposed recording. Counsel, the judge said softly to Daniel's attorney, your evidentiary foundation seems to be eroding under your feet. Then something I did not expect happened. Ethan rose from the back row before anyone could stop him, clutching his phone like a life raft. Your Honor, I'm sorry, but I need to say this. I saw my uncle put a USB in my grandma's sugar jar and take it out when she turned her back. He told me it was candy. It wasn't. The judge did not scold him. She asked his age, his grade, and whether anyone told him what to say. Ethan shook his head stiffly. He looked like Harold when he insisted on replacing a fuse instead of calling an electrician. The judge thanked him and told him he'd done a brave, foolish thing and that the adults should have protected him from it. Kira turned so pale I could see the little blue veins at her temples. Daniel stared at his shoes, then at me, then at the door. The court finds the recording inadmissible, the judge said at last, each word quiet and heavy. Further, I am issuing an order restraining any property transfers or financial authority changes regarding Ms. Bennett pending resolution. I am also referring this matter to the district attorney for review of potential fraud, evidence tampering, and elder abuse. Counsel, advise your clients of their exposure. And Ms. Bennett, the court is sorry you were put in this position. Silence stuffed the room. Then the paper of the judge's notes made a small scratch as she turned the page. In that little sound, I felt the floor of my life tilt back into level. Luis closed his folder with the same precision he'd opened it. I stood because my legs decided to. And when I turned, I found not the eyes I braced for, but Mrs. Park's small, unswerving gaze, and behind her, the maintenance man from our row of townhouses, Miguel, lifting his chin. Later, he would tell me he'd watched the comings and goings that week and had written down a license plate for Soundcraft in his little pocket notebook, just in case anyone would ever ask. Daniel whispered, Mom, and the bailiff told everyone to clear the room. On the courthouse steps, the district attorney's investigator approached with a card. Kira crumpled her tissue into points. The autumn wind raised the hair on my arms. Luis tucked the card into his pocket and said, We'll talk in my office. And, to me, quietly, you did everything right. You asked for help. Remember that. Ethan stood at my elbow, unsure whether he was allowed to touch me in this new world. I reached for his hand. He squeezed like he'd been underwater too long. The next morning, our HOA newsletter led with a bland note about ethical stewardship in shared communities, and my phone chimed with 3 messages from women I barely know who had watched me buy green onions in silence and were ready, finally, to say they had heard rumors and hadn't known what to do. Consequences take longer than humiliation. The district attorney opened an investigation. Richard from Soundcraft cut a deal to provide files and names. The invoice paper trailed like a ribbon all the way back to Kira's overeager planning emails. Daniel gave a statement in which the words, "I thought it was normal," appeared too many times. In the end, the court issued a protective order, appointed a neutral financial monitor to ensure no unauthorized changes could be attempted, and required Daniel and Kira to attend an elder rights class I didn't know existed, plus community service with the senior center where I shelve books. The judge warned them in careful words that criminal charges were still on the table pending the DA's review. The fact that she looked up when she said it made it feel like a gavel. I didn't ask for prison. I asked for peace. Luis drafted a new will and a living trust that places my house beyond anyone's spontaneous generosity, including my own during bad days. We included a letter of intent, plain words, the way I like them about who I am and how I want to be treated when I'm tired and my memory misfiles things. We listed my circle, Carla as my proxy, Priya as my banker, Mrs. Park as my neighbor with permission to scold anyone who parks in my spot, Lexi as my tech consultant paid in cookies, and Ethan whenever he is brave enough to look an adult in the eye and tell the truth. Daniel came by with no Kira and stood on my porch like a neighbor's child with a broken toy. He tried to give me apologies that did not start where they should. I let him talk until his sentences stopped looping. Then I told him he could come for dinner on Thursdays like everyone else, where there would be soup and he would do the dishes and we wouldn't talk about the house. We could talk about the weather and the tomatoes and how teenagers smell different after soccer practice. He nodded and cried without wiping tears the way he used to as a boy. I didn't touch his face. I put a bowl in his hands. Kira sent a letter through Luis saying she regretted any overreach. She added a second page about being stressed and wanting stability and how the Soundcraft man had seemed like a resource. I read it once and put it in the file with the restraining order, the HA newsletter, and the photo of the business card. I don't hate her. I just won't leave my doors open anymore when she's bored. Priya and Mrs. Park and Miguel came for tea. We sat at my wobbly kitchen table and talked about small things with the reverence small things deserve, the squeak the front gate makes and how to fix it, the new bus schedule, how people feel braver standing shoulder to shoulder than alone. Lexi showed me how to back up voicemails and lock my phone. She taught me to make a recording of my own saying, "If you're hearing this on a speaker at my table, ask for the original file." We all laughed until we needed tissues. On Wednesdays, I started a drop-in clinic at the community center called Paper and Power. It isn't grand. Seniors bring crumpled letters and suspicious forms. We read them together and ask the right questions. We stick Post-its on the dangerous parts and I write Luis's number on the back of the pens. Sometimes Lexi comes by with her laptop and shows a widower how to spot a fake email. Sometimes Ethan helps someone set up account alerts on their phone. When we finish, we eat cookies and use our real voices, not edited ones, to say what we want. If there's a lesson, it isn't about revenge dressed in flames. It's this: people can twist sound and paper into weapons, and the counterweight is community and insistence. I didn't outshout a lie. I surrounded it with people who could hear seams. On quiet afternoons, when the light hits my kitchen just right, I hear Harold's clock chime the correct hour, and it feels like a promise kept. I taught Ethan to wind it carefully, 2 clicks, and then stop. He never overdoes it. He listens for the faint resistance and lets the key go. That's what I do now with everything, listen for the resistance. Where the sound changes, I stop. And sometimes, very late, when the neighborhood is soft and the cat stretches into a warm comma, I take out Ethan's tiny note from behind our camping photo, the one that says, "Don't sign anything tomorrow," and I let the paper tremble in my hand before it settles. I ask myself if I would have done any of this without that little note. I don't know. I only know the thing that saved me began as a whisper in a child's voice and grew into a room where grown people were finally forced to hear the truth. If you ever find yourself with a speaker on your table and your own voice telling you what you supposedly want, pause and listen for the wrong chime. And if you hear it, even if your hands shake, call someone who knows how to show a judge where the seam is. Don't wait for luck. Call a neighbor. Call a banker with a careful gaze. Call a teenager with a laptop covered in moons. The sound of justice is rarely loud. It's the quiet click when the key turns and you stop, exactly where you should.